Hello, everybody. Happy day after Friday the 13th to all those who observe. This is George Armbruster for EDUC 5503, Week 5. And this is discussing Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory, Carol Dweck's growth mindset theory, how they've shaped my experiences, and how they could shape students' learning experiences. And just starting from the top, considering the following: which intelligences resonate most with your learning style? Um, I I have always found that although a I am definitely a spatial learner, especially where spatial learning applies to the idea of composition, the idea of thinking of things in space. Um, I remember in art class, I was told that I had a good grasp of elements in space and of composition in a three-dimensional space, working 2D implied 3D in a 2D space. And so I've always had a good grasp for those kinds of elements and for manipulating things in a space or even if it's in an imagined space. But with that also comes the fact that I definitely don't have a very strong. I don't have a strong logical or mathematical connection to that content. I've never had a particularly strong um, organization, for one thing. But as far as you know, being able to construct things. Anybody that's read any of my papers or read any of the things that I've ever written will notice that there's a rather loose structure. I sort of jump around, I guess would be the best way to describe it. I've never had a very strong logical learning style. Um, for example, being able to just sit down and be able to just read something or be able to process something from, say, a lecture or from, um, I guess what you would call an old education model. I do not connect well to content that is just handed to me, put on a worksheet, put on a page. Some people can do that. I just can't. So I'm definitely not a logically minded, logical acuity person. Um, as far as interpersonal learning goes, um, I've always been a strong learner when working around and inspired by others. I learned that even um, back in low level art classes. I learned that in science class. I learned that in chemistry and anatomy and physiology. I learned that I do work well in groups, and some people loathe working in groups. Some people loathe the commitments and the hangups and they don't like all the things that can go wrong, right, with a group assignment. We've all probably had that one moment where we had a group assignment and either something goes wrong or we end up getting more put onto us by others. But I discovered that interpersonal learning, I guess, an interpersonal intelligence, like what Gardner's talking about. When he said intelligence, he said, I wish I probably had chosen a less controversial word, but just our acuities, our strengths, right? So I find a strength in interpersonal communication and a strength in interpersonal learning, um, and that is a major part of my assignment that I created this week was the idea of working in an environment where you work together and then you pull apart and you work separately and then you bring your disparate elements of art together and you create your frog, you create your center idea. You do your bricolage, right? You bring it all together and you make it work somehow. Some person's dancing in the background. There might be some music playing. Somebody drives by and throws up some confetti next to a drawing that's been collaged of a frog. What's it going to look like? Who knows? But we're going to make it work, right? So uh, as far as my learning or my intelligences go, I'm definitely interpersonal, and I'm definitely spatial. Are the two. But as far as encountering a fixed mindset, going back to Dweck, um, gosh, you encounter fixed mindsets so much in art. How many people have taken an art class or been in an art class, or those of us who teach art class, and you hear, "I can't do that. I'm not talented enough," or "Wow, they're so good. I'll never get as good as them," or "How did he ever get that good?" Or my personal favorite, what pencil do you use? How do you do that? What technique do you use to get to whatever it is you're doing? Like, how did you manage to get your line that straight? I used a ruler. What what pencil did you use to get that? I used a number two pencil. I used an HB pencil. There's one the insistence that there has to be a shortcut, there has to be a trick, or there is the other insistence that they've got to have so much more innate talent. There's this innate skill level or something, and it's just sort of this. They're just sort of giving up, right? And we've encountered that in other areas too. I'm sure if any folks here that have done band or been involved in music, I'm sure there's probably a very similar language there, right? You get in and you go, I can't do that. How do I even excuse me? How how do I even start to make art that looks like that? Well, it's process and it's refining your abilities. It's muscle memory. It's like a sport. It's like band. It's like anything. You train your mind. You train your hand. But art is a notorious sinkhole for fixed mindset folks who just come in and they see the artwork. They don't see the amount of effort that went into it, and they think, well, how do I even get started on something like that? And to look at the pipeline of, you start off with these very formal aesthetic abilities. You start off with, we identify these principles of art, these common elements that every piece of artwork has to it. And we understand the language behind it. We understand, just down to how you hold a pencil, an overhand grip versus that pinched grip for writing. Just changing the way you hold a pencil makes a change. Technique, right? It's like a toolbox. You fill your toolbox up. And the fixed mindset has to go out the window where you're willing to say, okay, it's not an issue of talent. It's just I either haven't drawn this head from this angle this many times, or I just don't understand color theory quite enough. But if I go down that hole and I go into color theory and I get interested in that, then I want to start, maybe I want to do a project or an assignment about color theory. And then as the art teacher, you connect to them and you go, okay, what can I do to incorporate color, which is, a principle of art? We incorporate that into the next assignment. So this is where you see what the students' acuities are. When you go back to Gardner's intelligences, it's all about acuities. It's all about what do they connect to. I've seen students that did incredibly well with those 1 point perspective, recede to the background, and there's tiles and there's patterns, and they can get them all to recede because they understand the concept of, they have a spatial acuity for it, right? Or I've seen students get into the performance elements. I've seen students make an entire project out of making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and they would just make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches over and over and record themselves doing it. And it was you pick up the bread and you go slip, slip, and you close it and you sit the bread down and then you go to the next one. And they're literally making 100 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. What does it mean? I don't know, but there's something mildly hypnotic about watching a kid make 100 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and recording it. The performance element of it, that kind of learning acuity, that kind of wide spectrum of what is art and how do you make art and what is art, it invites that kind of multidisciplinary approach to making art, to teaching art, to talking about art and critiquing it. So as an educator, segueing into that, how might I combine theories to better support diverse learners in my classroom? If there's one thing we know, it is that regardless of your language, regardless where you come from, people connect to art. People connect to representations, or if they come from a culture, say they come from a culture that is iconoclastic. They don't believe in portrayal of a natural human form. I guarantee you, there is still art there. There is still sequential art. There is still mandala art. There is still geometric art. There are portrayals of art in every culture, regardless of what their social mores are, regardless of what their prohibitions are. Every single culture has a kind of art that allows them to connect to each other. Art is a great language that you can connect with people on. And I could show Spanish-speaking kids in my, I could show ESL kids in my art class in 6th grade an image of Botticelli. And they might not know exactly who Botticelli is, but they can say they've seen one of his pieces of artwork. I could show one of our Japanese exchange students Michelangelo. They know who Michelangelo is. It's universal. Van Gogh. Van Gogh is known literally by everybody. So the idea of, as an educator, combining theories and supporting diverse learners, the idea the idea is that you can take art and you can connect it to universal human experiences or universal human feelings. And in the same way, you can connect elements of multiple intelligences. You can connect all concepts of the growth mindset. And Dweck, it's really about, I don't want to say it's just about feelings or belief, but it really is about like a psychology. It's about a way of thinking. So combining that into, to encourage diverse learners, it's it's really just about taking them in and getting them to change their language up, to think of it like, well, I haven't gotten it yet, or I was trying to do this and I didn't quite get it. And it's okay to admit that they failed. They can admit that they failed. Who cares? You failed. I fail all the time. I try a different style of art and it looks terrible. I'll try it a few more times. It'll get better. And then I learn something from it. So just knowing in that space that failure is not an inherently negative thing. Of course, you want to succeed, but encouraging them to change the language up. That's what we have to do. Connecting to our learners, whether extra needs, whether they might be limited in their motor neurological ability to hold that pencil, finding novel ways for them to express art. I have seen students with motor neuron needs grasping a brush in their teeth and making art. I have seen them making art in other ways. I have seen them using capacitative technology to make art or make marks. I have seen that there is not much with the technology and with patient, deliberate, relevant pedagogy to go with it from sensitive and aware teachers. There's really nothing that a student can't do, honestly, regardless of what their needs might be, like in terms of like special physical developmental needs. As far as language needs go, the connections that we can make now with technology and the connections we can make now with students, the language barriers, I think, are down further and further and further. And being able, again, to connect through universal language like art makes my job a lot easier, honestly. So I think combining theories and connecting them to the diverse learners, it goes back to connecting. You have to have, we talked about, those of us that have started on our journey in pedagogy and talking about, courses in education, we talk about TPK, we talk about technology and pedagogy and knowledge. And I go back to that a lot too. So the idea of pedagogy that is grounded in multiple intelligences, you encourage them to explore those intelligences, those acuities, those skills. The growth mindset through pedagogy is about taking a positive failure mindset. When you're talking about, particularly in a work of art, if I fail at a work of art, we do critique class. We do a critique at the end of class, and I have constructed for them these sort of pre-scripted critique questions that can be asked, or ways that they can better articulate their questions or their criticisms, so that they can do it in a positive way. Right? That's what we want to do. We want to get the kids to be able to talk. We want to get the kids to be able to talk to each other, not rip each other's heads off. Have constructively critical conversations with each other, right? And talk about their artwork. Talk about what went right to them, what went wrong, what they were thinking when they did this. What they were thinking when they chose that color of paint or chose that particular mode of expression. What were they doing? Let's figure it out, right? And figuring the why out is so much more interesting, at least in my opinion, especially when the students might be subconsciously doing those things, and then they stop and go, "Oh, you know what? I do keep making artwork um, portraying mothers. Maybe I do. Maybe I need to have a talk with my mom." I'm using it just one example, one extreme example, but you never know what connections you'll make with the kids, what connections you'll make with the students. They'll make a connection to the content, and they might be surprised when it happens. And toward the end here, it says personal anecdotes, classroom experience, specific examples in my reflections. I would be remiss if I did not bring up some of my most successful students teaching art, K through 12 art. And they were some of my little bits, as I like to call them, some of my little ones. We're talking like kindergarten and first grade, and we're talking about um, kids that were afraid to um, interact with the materials, kids that were afraid to they were afraid to get dirty, they were afraid to make a mark and then look over and see that their friend made a better mark than them, and they would go to tears. And so what I did was I got these gigantic reams of like butcher paper, those big huge reams of paper, and I laid them out on all the tables. And then I put paint out. And then I stepped back and I kind of looked and I said, who are some of my kids that really I can tell have had a lot of work either at home with mom and dad, or have been making a lot of art, and they're a little bit more comfortable with the material, you know, and they're already very advanced in the if you ever read the drawing on the right side of the brain, and the idea that there are different categories of advancement in terms of like our visual acuity, are the way in which we draw, showing a certain level of development that's not necessarily one to one. It's not all like, this is not all verbatim like truth or anything, but as a general guideline, drawing on the right side of the brain has some really great ideas, because it talks about, you know, when children are moving past a symbolic stage and you're actually seeing that they're beginning to make an effort to, instead of drawing eyes like almonds, are they actually trying to draw the overlap? Are they actually trying to draw the way in which the tear duct, you know, tucks in right here, and then, you know, the furrow of my brow comes down like this? When you see students trying to make that connection, you want to take them under your wing, and you want to start giving them different projects to do, different assignments that challenge them. So with these younger kids, when I start seeing kids that are starting to move up on that hierarchy, and they're moving past that symbolic stage, and you see them making connections, you kind of want to make them a leader at the table. You take those kids and you sew them out, you know. Excuse me. And then those kids that are a little bit more timid, you pair them up, and then you do a group assignment on those big pieces of butcher paper, and I have them doing a drawing. And the drawing might be a composition. The drawing might be, well, here's some art prompts. I'm going to draw some cards, and I'm going to read them out to you. And here, you do draw this, and you draw this, you draw this, and put them together, and let's see what we come up with. And then as the kids are drawing, they're just having fun. And sometimes they'll accidentally scribble over each other's things, or they'll be drawing in one space. One kid will be off to the side being very precious. Everyone else is drawing all over. And then I go, hey, go out there and just start drawing. Go out and start drawing. And the kid will leave their little safe, precious square where they don't want anybody to draw on their stuff, and they don't want to draw anyone's stuff. And then they'll go over there and they'll draw. And then I'll move their crayon and they'll scribble on someone's stuff. I'll be like, oh no, you drew on his stuff. And I'll look over at their friend that they just drew on, and their friend will be like, I don't care. And before you know it, now they're starting to draw with everyone else. Boom. They've broken down that aesthetic gatekeeping, that aesthetic fear of messing up, that aesthetic fear of connecting, right? So now I've gotten these little kids to start making art, and there's less fear now. The kids are less afraid. They're just making art, right? So, in conclusion, we need to. And look, there's Eliza. She made a cameo. So,
oh, hi.
So, what we have here with multiple intelligence, what we have here with growth mindset, as it applies back specifically to art, it is about, you know, engaging with the students, getting them to talk, getting them to actually explain what they're doing with their art, getting them to explore different media expressions of art. Can the kids dance or tap out an idea? Can the kids um, do some kind of an installation piece that's not just meant to be seen from one direction? Can it be seen all the way in the round?
Like 3D.
Exactly. Yeah. Can we get the kids, like sculpture, right? Sculpture is meant to be seen in the round. Some sculpture is meant to be seen from the front. Some is meant to be seen all the way around. Because when you see the weary Hercules and you're walking around him, and you notice, if you hadn't looked at the back, you wouldn't notice that he's holding two of the apples of the Hesperides clutched behind his back. That was done intentionally to get you to walk all the way around and go, hey, there's a story going on here with Hercules. So the whole point with growth mindset, and the whole point with multiple intelligences, is again connecting with the kids, get them to explore their interests. I hear intelligences, I think interests. I think, how do you want to learn? How do you want to make art? That's the way I hear it. And growth mindset means learn how to fail. Don't be afraid to admit you failed. Talk about how you could have done better next time. And everybody in this room has failed at something, so we're just going to talk about it. And then next time when you make art, boom, you're going to be more comfortable. You're not going to probably make the same mistakes again, and you're going to get easier at talking about it. Because if you can not just make the art, but talk about the art, you are improving your deeper connection to the art, your deeper connection to the media, and you're going to be a better artist. And you're also just going to be a generally better person. Because if you can talk to other people about disparate things, about differences, and have a civil conversation with them and disagree with them in a humane and a caring way, I'd say that's a win, right? So that is my conclusion. And have a good day.
Bye. Love you.